Okay, let's get this thing going. So, hi everyone. My name is Lior, and today I'm going to talk to you a bit about how you can leverage or should leverage DevOps practices to better manage your Jira configuration. But before we even start, before I tell you who I am and about Salto, there are three important things that I hope you'll get from this talk. So by the end of this talk, hopefully, first of all, you'll be convinced why all of us need to apply DevOps principles to Jira administration. You'll know how to Control F or Command F anything and everything in your Jira instance. So get complete visibility to your entire Jira implementation. Find field, for example, everywhere. And I'll show you how to do it with Salto's free tool. And lastly, I hope you'll be at least 30% less afraid to make big, scary changes in your Jira configuration, in your Jira instance. So, okay, so let's go. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll answer them throughout the presentation. So nice to meet you. As I said, I'm Lior, I'm a product manager in Salto. I live in Tel Aviv. Right now in Tel Aviv, Israel, the best city in the world. You should all visit if you haven't. Married with two cute kids, avid gamer. I took some time off from the latest Monkey Island game to prepare this presentation, and hopefully once it's done, I can go back to playing. But maybe most importantly of all of this is that I've been a Jira administrator and user for more than 15 years now, throughout various workplaces. I started before there was even a cloud version. All right, a bit about Salto. So I work for Salto. We're 3 years old, and we built a solution which I'll show you today. We have offices in Tel Aviv and San Francisco with more than 70 employees. We're well funded by some of the best funds in the world. And on the bottom, you see some logos of our users and customers who use Salto to gate visibility into their business applications and essentially treat them like DevOps treat infrastructure. And we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, before we dive into Jira and all the cool demos and stuff I want to show you, I want to zoom out for a second and talk about the modern company. And if you think about it, today's modern companies, and I'm sure the companies you all work for, they run on SaaS applications. So different departments, for example, sales or marketing, each one has its own SaaS applications, which they need to operate the business, right? So the sales department uses probably Salesforce, customer support uses Zendesk and maybe Jira, finance uses Oracle NetSuite, for example. But all of these have one thing in common. All the departments need SaaS applications to run the business. So SaaS applications, SaaS business applications are a critical part of modern companies. However, let's take a moment to think about the challenges that we see with business applications, including Jira, but not only Jira. Think about Zendesk as well. All of these challenges apply to both. So the first big question is, how do you actually know what's implemented in your Jira instance, for example? You've been in the company for Jira has been in the company for 2 or 5 or 10 years, and you're right now in a state in which there are probably tons of projects, workflows, statuses, fields, automations. How do you actually get a clear picture of what's implemented in your Jira instance? That's when you zoom out. And when you zoom in on a specific change, how do you know today who made this change and why and when? So you see a custom field, who added it? Why was it added? As part of what big change? These are questions which are hard to answer for almost any business application. Now, let's say you want to make a change to that business application. You want to change an automation or add an option to a custom field selector. How can you assess what is the impact of this planned change? I'm going to rename something. Is that going to break anything? Is it going to break anything inside Jira? So for example, I change a field and some automation stops working, or maybe even break something external to Jira. So maybe there's some integration of some external system with Jira, which will break if you rename a field, right? This is a very common scenario. How do you develop changes reliably without impacting production? Think about software developers. They don't develop stuff immediately on production. They test it first. So how can we do this on our Jira instance and other business applications as well? Once you do a change, and these are questions that the software development world has already answered. Once you make a change to your Jira instance before you deploy to production, how can you review these changes with your team? So do some collaboration and create collective code ownership. Not that a single person did a change, but the team saw this change, approved this change. How do you do that for your business application? And then how do you promote that change reliably to production in a quick and reliable way and not manually? And if something breaks, how do you roll back that change? And again, not manually but in a modern, fast, reliable way. How do you say, okay, something broke 2 days ago, I want to roll back everything to where it was? How do you do that? And finally, if we're looking at compliance, a lot of times auditors come in, internal or external, and they ask to see, okay, show me the paper trail. Which changes were made in your business applications? When were they made? Why? Who made them? How can you keep a reliable paper trail for compliance reasons? So these are all big challenges, which I've talked to tens of Jira admins over the past year, and it's painful, right? For Jira, but also for other business applications. So what can we do? Today's business applications are being run this way, in a challenging way. Let's take a look at another revolution which happened in the last 10 or 15 years. A huge revolution, the as code revolution or concept, has completely transformed IT. So I remember 15 years ago, I had to spin up a new virtual machine or a few virtual machines in one of my workplaces. And I had to do everything manually. I had to go to some VMware wizard and click next, and do this for each machine. And then if a month afterward I needed to repeat that, then I needed to do the entire manual process again. But that was 15 years ago. And since then, there was a huge revolution, essentially a fusion between the development world and operations, or what we call today DevOps. And it actually helped IT infrastructure take a huge leap forward. So today you have tools like Terraform. So instead of manually spinning up a cluster of VMs, you just write code. You write code which says, I need 3 virtual machines. This is their spec. And you give it to some automated tool, which can do it way better than previously. So from very manual processes, which are error-prone, and organizational silos, so each part of the organization touched their own infrastructure, and there was no knowledge sharing, there was no collaboration. When building infrastructure was slow, which led to infrequent releases of improvements and eventually reduced quality. This was before the as-code revolution. Once we automated everything, okay, we automated all operational tasks of infrastructure with code. Once we did that, it led to faster releases and shorter delivery sessions, and maybe most importantly, increased quality. So you need to spin up a cluster which does something, go, 1 click and you're done. You need to add this to scale a bunch of servers to handle increased load on your servers. You just write a piece of code to do that, and there's software which does that for you. And so this was a huge revolution, which took infrastructure to today's DevOps world. And what we think in Salto, that we should apply the same revolution to business applications. We should manage Jira in a similar way. What does that mean? So we call it business engineering. And if you're all Jira administrators, you're essentially business engineers because you're engineers and you work on your business applications. And we think that all of us should apply and adopt the best practices and methodologies and tools from the software development world and from the DevOps world into how we all manage our business applications. What does that mean? Let's talk about the details here. So the first thing, I think, in the base of all of this is we should represent our, for example, our Jira configuration as text, for example, as code, which means if I take, there are thousands of tiny items in Jira, projects and screens and workflows and statuses and custom fields and issue types and automations. Take all of that and represent all these configuration items which are scattered in different UI views and screens and databases. Take all of them and transform them into a bunch of files, just text files. And once you do that, once you represent your entire Jira instance as code, you can really easily answer, okay, what's implemented? For example, I want to ask, where is a field being used? I can just Control F, I can find in files and go over all files and find all the places where that field is used. And it's so much easier when your entire configuration is represented by code. Now let's take it further. If we have configuration as code, if we have every workflow represented as a text file, then once you make a change, it's essentially a version of your Jira instance. And you can push it to Git, to any source control system, such as Git, which means that once you make a change, you commit it to Git, and that builds a history of all changes. Right? So think of a Git repository. It represents each and every change you did in Jira's configuration. Each one is a version. So it allows you to easily answer questions like, who did this change? And when was this change made? Because it's all in Git, right? Same as software development. Once everything is code, you can use code analysis tools to answer questions on dependencies, on change impact. I'm going to rename an issue type. What's going to break? You can actually have tools to automatically answer that questions for you because everything is code, and analyzing code is way easier than analyzing the Jira instance itself. And it allows you to create shared responsibility within the team. So if today you have multiple Jira administrators and one admin touches a specific part in Jira, nobody else knows about it. But if everything is code and everything is in a source control, so one administrator can make a change, push it to Git, create a branch, ask for somebody else to review it. Other people can join and they can see everything happen because it's code in a shared source control. So it creates this shared responsibility and removes silos between people and parts of the organizations. Now, once everything is code, it also allows us to really easily work with sandboxes. Instead of doing everything directly on production, you should develop your changes in sandboxes. So take a sandbox, which is a copy of production or partial copy of production, make the changes there without impacting production, test it there without impacting production, and finally, just move your changes back to production. And because it's code, it's really easy. You take the sandbox, transform it to code, then push this code to production. How do you do this? the same way as you do this in software development. If you want to change something, how do you do it in Git? A software developer wants to develop a new feature. What does he do? They open a feature branch, they do all the changes there, and once they're done, they submit a pull request, somebody else reviews it, and then finally, once it's done, once it's approved, you take this feature branch, you merge it to your main branch, which is production, and in our case, you deploy that change to production. So really apply all these software development concepts to your Jira administration. This is how we think things should be done. And of course, if everything's in Git, then you can roll back really easily. You want to roll back to a specific version? Great. You do Git revert, get the code of Jira on that point in time, and then push that code to production, to deploy to production. And finally, this Git repository of every single change is the perfect paper trail for you. So if every commit, in addition to the change itself, you also attach some ticket ID, for example, from Jira or any other ticketing system. So you can actually use Jira to write the tickets, to open tickets which describe the changes that you're doing in your main Jira instance configuration. So you have this perfect paper trail of each Jira change you did, why it was made, and attached to some Jira ticket. And this is exactly the vision that Salto implements. By using Salto, it's what you get. You get a platform, a SaaS platform, which connects to your business applications, for example, Jira, but also Zendesk, Salesforce, NetSuite, and more. We connect to these instances. We fetch all the configuration from those instances, transform them into files, into code, and then we bring this to you. And you can find and explore this code. You can find anything. You can look at your entire configuration in one place without worrying. You can analyze dependencies. Okay, so here's a field. Who uses that field? Super easy to do that. You can take this code and deploy it across environments. So if you have two Jira instances, you can compare them and then pick, okay, these things exist in this instance, but don't exist in the next one. So I have things in my testing which are done and they're not in production yet. I can see them, compare, and then deploy it to production. And if you want to take it even further, you can really build a CI/CD chain. You can automate the entire thing by working with real pull requests and automated deployments, and do like a Jira release every hour or every day. Whenever there's a change ready and it's approved, you approve it in Git, and there is some chain which automatically pushes that change to production. It's magical. It's like exactly like software developers work, but on your Jira configuration. And all of this is enabled because Salto essentially gives you your configuration as code in version control, which allows you to do rollbacks and analyze why something happened and essentially get documentation for all your changes. I'll pause here for a second before we dive into specific use cases and demos. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat right now. I'll give you a few seconds. And if there aren't any questions, we'll move on. Okay. So I told you I talked to a lot of to the tens of Jira administrators over the last year to understand their pains. By doing everything I described, what can you gain today to your Jira instance? And some of these are available in our free offering. You get a link by the end of this session. So the most basic thing is just migrate changes between your instances or within an instance between projects. So if you have two instances, for example, testing and production, or more instances, you can very easily select changes that you want to migrate between one instance and another instance. any change in configuration, automations, fields, workflows, projects, issue types, you name it. Select them, deploy them to another instance, and do it with a few clicks instead of manual work and exports and all sorts of weird methods that I heard about, which are just, they're necessary because you don't have good tools to do that, but they are cumbersome. I'll show you how easy it is with Salto by the end of this session. Second is to compare and align your projects. A lot of administrators end up with tens or even hundreds of projects, each one with its tiny differences, and consolidation is important. So you can easily compare one project to another and align these to work in the same way, again, in a very effective and efficient way. The third thing, which I think this one is the most impressive thing when we demo this to new users, they like this the most, this ability to find anything in your configuration. So think about it. We took everything in Jira, the metadata, the configuration, transformed it into files, and we give you the option to browse these files, to search in these files. So there's a custom field which we want to know exactly where it's used. Workflow transitions, automations in a JQL query. Great. Just with one search box, you can search across your entire Jira configuration and understand where things are used. That's super important when you want to do changes and you want to make sure that the change is not going to break anything. Another thing that we heard is Jira instance consolidation. We heard that from users who had many different teams, each one opening their own cloud instance, and then they ended up with like 20 instances of Jira, and they don't want it. They want to consolidate everything into a single instance. So super easy to do that. Or companies which acquired other companies, and with those other companies came, their own 5-year-old Jira instance, and they want to consolidate these. So instead of exporting everything in one way or the other, with Salto, it's super easy to just, click the things, select the things you want to migrate, you want to consolidate, move them from one server to another. Jira's audit log, I don't know if you had the chance, probably most of you had the chance to work with it. It's not great. If something breaks or you want to understand what change was made a few days ago, it doesn't have all the tiny details. It's not super accurate. So with Salto, by presenting everything as code in a version control, you get to see the truth, the reliable, accurate truth about what changed in your Jira configuration and when and who did it. And finally, you just gain visibility to what your team is making. So if you're not the only Jira administrators and you have other people touching Jira, you may want to say, okay, I want to understand what's going on, or even more than that, there's a specific area, for example, permissions. There's a specific area which I want to get an email whenever it changes because it's sensitive. So you can pick specific files, which are specific areas in Jira, and say, I want to get an email whenever somebody touches this code, essentially. And then you get an email and you see who did what and when. Okay, I think there's a question here about Jira project administrators. I think you can gain a lot from this as well, especially from the visibility part. It just allows you to gain very good visibility to how your project is built. I'll show you what this means in like a minute. I hope that that would help you understand how it can help you. Just know how your project is implemented. And maybe other projects as well. So you can compare and you can even take parts from other projects. If you see some other workflow that you like, use that workflow. I'll show you in a second. Okay, it's time to do some demos. The first demo I want to show you is how you can find everything in your configuration. And again, you can select any object in Jira and just find it across the entire configuration. You can find where it's used and how it's used, and it's super helpful in order for you to never accidentally break anything when you do changes. So let's jump to a demo. I have some tiny Jira instance here, which I'm using essentially as a sandbox. It's not an official Atlassian sandbox, but it's a Jira instance that I use in order to test things. So I took some things from production here because I'm going to make a change. And let's say I have some custom field and it's called compliance type. Let me show you this compliance type. It's a field that we use on issues to indicate whether this issue relates to a specific compliance, such as GDPR or HIPAA or SOC 2, right? Super simple. And let's say, by the way, this is my sandbox instance. I have exactly the same thing on my production instance. Okay, this is my production instance. I have these options here. That's great. Okay. Now let's say I want to add an option here. I realize that I need another type of compliance, ISO 27002. Okay. And I want to add this option to this field. Now, I can just go ahead and do that, but I want to make sure before I do that, that I understand which parts in Jira today use this field. How is my change going to impact my Jira instance? So how do I do that? Let me take you to Salto. This is Salto. By the end of this session, you'll all get a link to sign up for this for free. And what I did here is I essentially connected both these environments, my sandbox and my production. I connected them to Salto, and Salto fetches the entire configuration into our SaaS platform. So if I connected to my sandbox and I fetched everything here, I get a full view of the entire configuration, the entire Jira configuration in one place. So I can see all my projects here, my issue types, my fields, everything in one place, and everything as files, as code. So let's search for my compliance type field. Okay, here it is. It's my compliance type field. And I see all its details. I can actually see the context and I can see the options there. That's great. Again, I pulled everything from Jira. But what's interesting here is this section, used by. So in addition to taking all the configuration from Jira into Salto and representing it as files, which you can see, we also create this graph of dependencies. So if this field is used by something, we'll know about it and we'll write it here. So you can actually see that this field, for example, is used by some board filter, a JQL, 2 screens, and an automation. When ISO compliance is assigned, notify some ISO group. That's interesting. And I'm going to add another option to this field, which is another ISO option. So I should probably go to that automation and maybe I need to change something there. So I can easily click this to jump to the automation. This is the automation, but let's see it in Jira. So I can see that this automation actually checks whenever a compliance type changes and it's equal ISO 27001, then it sends an email to some people, okay? And this is interesting because if I'm going to add an option now, let's add it quickly. I'm going to add another option here, okay, ISO 27002. I probably want to add another option to my automation, right? Because now if somebody selects that other ISO type, I also want to notify the same group. So by using Salto, I understood that there's a field there's an automation which relies on the field which I'm going to change. and I need to fix it. So instead of equals 27002, I can do that it's one of these two values. Okay, great. And that's it. So just to recap what I just did, I wanted to change a field. I found it in Salto. I inspected who uses this field across my entire Jira configuration. And I noticed that I need to fix an automation as well after I change this field. So I did that. If you think about it, this is super powerful because Jira itself doesn't do that. Jira itself, you can essentially go ahead and delete a field or add an option or remove an option without Jira preventing you from doing that. Maybe a few days afterwards, you notice that this automation has some errors, it doesn't work. So Jira isn't too careful about what it lets you do, but using Salto and using this type of visibility, you can plan your changes. You can understand what's the impact of your changes before you make them. Any questions? Feel free to use the chat to ask. Okay. While I was talking, I actually fetched the instance again because I just did some changes in my sandbox. So I fetched all these changes again into Salto. This can be automatic, but I wanted to do it now for the demo. If I look at what was fetched, remember I told you everything is in code. So I can actually show you how things change. This is the code of the custom field, and there's a new option added here in position 6, ISO 27002. Great. So I brought these changes back to Salto. Now what? So I used my sandbox, I changed my field, I tested it, I changed the automation as well because Salto helped me understand I need to fix the automation. But now what? Now I need to do this in production because everything I did here was on my tiny instance, my test instance, my sandbox. So how do you do it today? My guess is that a lot of you just go to production and you do these things again, right? So you go and change the field and you go and change the automation. And this was an easy thing. It was just 2 changes, but if you have larger things, you probably write them down and then you do them again in production. We think that's not a good way to do that. And I'm sure you'll agree it's manual, it's slow, and it's not very accurate. It may lead, if you forget a step, it may lead to something breaking, or like you tested it perfectly on sandbox, but it won't work perfectly in production because you didn't remember to move one tiny thing. So we think you should work with the more modern way. And what we suggest is very easy. When you want to do a change, take what you want to work on, the project and automation, the field, take it from production, seed some sandbox with the production configuration data. And this sandbox can be any Jira instance. It doesn't have to be the official Atlassian sandbox. Build your change in the sandbox, test it there, and then use Salto to deploy this change back to production with a few clicks. So instead of all these manual changes, do it automatically, do it in a modern way. Let me show you how this looks like in Salto. Okay, so we made our changes, and I now want to deploy them to production. So, new deployment. First question is from where to where. So I want to deploy changes from my sandbox to Jira instance to my production. Let's call it deploying ISO 27002 changes. Great. The first thing I get is a screen which shows me the difference, all the things which exist in one instance and don't exist in another instance. So I can select my changes from here, but I already know what I want. So yeah. So there's, actually I can search for the ISO option, right? It's much easier. So I can see here that indeed there's a custom field context with a new option, okay? So you see, this is the custom field context for my compliance type field. And I see a change here, right? I see that there was some addition to my options list, which is the new ISO 27002. Great, I want to deploy this. So I just select this option, super easy. Another thing which I wanted to move was the automation itself. And let's take a look at that. So remember what we did what we did there? We actually took the automation and changed it from field equals something to field is one of a few values. So you can actually see that change here, right? We changed the comparison from equals to one of, and we can even see instead of ISO 27001, this was deleted, and instead we have two values, ISO 27001 and 002. Great, this is exactly what we want. We want all the changes in this automation. And that's it. We selected the elements that we want to move from our sandbox to production. Now I'm going to ask Salto to preview to prepare the deployment plan, which means I'm going to calculate whether I can actually deploy these changes. So Salto makes sure there aren't any errors, that there aren't any dependencies that you haven't brought. So for example, if you try to deploy a project, but you don't deploy the new permission scheme that you created for it, Salto will tell you, wait, stop, you need to go back and select the permission scheme as well, and will help you select all the required things as well. So Salto makes sure that everything's in order. I see here that everything's okay. There are no pre-deployed problems. All the things that I wanted to move, all the changes in my production, my automation are here. The new option in my custom field is here. Everything is ready to go. And I click deploy. What happens now is that Salto talks to the Jira API, the production Jira API, and essentially pushes all these changes, and we're done. That's it. Deploy successful. You see that deployed 5 things, so everything was deployed. And let's see it actually. So again, this is my production instance. And if I open the context and default value here, I see the new value. That's it. Easy as pie. Of course, now is the interesting part. The interesting part about source control comes. You just did a change. You probably want to push this change to Git, create a version of your Jira configuration, which includes this change, and explain in the commit and the ticket why you did this. There's a system, but this system allows you to work and do changes to your Jira instance in a modern way. And that's how we envision the future and where we should all go when it comes to administration of Jira instances or any other business application, Zendesk configuration, Salesforce as well. Any questions? Now's the time. From my end, this is what I wanted you to get from this session. Going back to my first slide, I hope that you understand what business engineering is and why we should all apply and leverage DevOps practices when we manage our Jira configuration. I hope you understand how to use our tool to get complete visibility and to find everything in your Jira instance. And I hope you understand how you can be a bit less afraid to make scary changes to your Jira instance. That's it from my end. I'll wait for questions. If you want to ask further questions, feel free to visit our virtual booth to set up a one-on-one meeting. You can just send me an email or find me in Twitter. And maybe most importantly, and I urge you to do this now, sign up for our platform. You can just go to this link right now, sign up to Salto. It's free forever. You can connect your Jira instance it will take you between 2 and 3 minutes to fetch all your Jira configuration into Salto, and you'll get the same type of full visibility that I showed you today. You can search everything. You can see what uses what. Everything's available. Please go ahead and play with this, try it out, and let us know what you think. Thank you. Any other questions in the chat? Okay. So with that, I think we are done. Thanks for attending this session. Again, go to this link now, download salto.io/JiraCon. You'll get access to this free tool, connect your Jira, and really let me know what you think. My life in Salto is dedicated to helping Jira admins, so I'll be really glad to talk to all of you. Once you try it out, let me know if there's something you want to see from our tool that you don't get, or if you really liked something. Thanks. Thank you.